And first of all, of course, thank you very much, Women Tech Network, for having me, for inviting me. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here with you all today. And of course, thank you all very much for joining. So I guess I'm gonna just jump in straight into my topic and begin with the fact that back in 2020, the world has experienced something very unexpected and highly influential, and that was, of course, COVID-19 pandemic. And it was so influential that more than a year after, it is still one of the hottest topics. It made a huge impact on each and every single aspect of our lives. So I'm here today to talk to you about what kind of impact it made and is still making to our work life, or in other words, how the new normal is shaping the future of talent. Honestly, this is a very broad and complex topic which can be addressed from many different angles, and we have only 20 minutes today. So as I cannot address everything, I decided to narrow it down a bit and talk about what we know is probably going to happen within the labor market as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and how this should affect how you choose your future employer. I'm also gonna share a couple of Vinted examples here just to illustrate what exactly would you want to look for, right? So just a slide to illustrate what was 2020 all about. But I want to actually start off with looking into the reason of why it is so scary and stressful to change jobs. And the roots for that is the biggest fear that human beings have. And that's, of course, is the fear of unknown. This is why changing jobs has always been complicated, and it's absolutely normal. We spend almost 1/3 of our time working, and that's why we want to make the right decision. But the problem is we know a lot about our current employer and very little about the future one. We fear of unknown, and the reason for that is we forget to properly interview our potential employer. This is a very common mistake I've seen since the beginning of my career because people are used to being interviewed, but usually forget that at the end of the day, both sides are making a decision, and both sides have to have all the information they need to make the right decision. But now, when Corona hit us, loads of new unknown fields appeared. We hear a lot of negative information about the pandemic, about economic instability, about growing unemployment rates, and that enlarges our fear to change the jobs. Plus, there is a lot of speculation around the topic, but no one really knows for sure how this new normal will look like. And even if we were interviewing our employers before the pandemic, chances are that we're gonna miss to discuss some important aspects which arose as a result of the pandemic. So today I'm gonna talk to you about the trends that most probably gonna stick, so that you can address that with your potential future employer and see if it's gonna be adaptable enough to survive in the post-pandemic world, and even if it's gonna survive, is it gonna strive or be the most suitable place for you to work? So first, and I'd say heaviest change that the pandemic brought to us were the changes in the economic landscape. While some industries are crumbling down, others are thriving. The hardest hit was received by the industries which by nature include a lot of human interaction and simply cannot continue due to the pandemic restrictions. And that, of course, are industries like travel and transportation, energy and resources, retail, hotels, restaurants, cafes, and similar. And the thriving industries are naturally those which offer help fighting the pandemic, offer substitutes for what we can no longer do, and simply helps people adapt to the changes in our everyday life. And that those industries are like healthcare and fitness, shipping and delivery, e-commerce, software development, and so on. So the most important thing to do in order to feel a bit, at least a bit safer when changing jobs, is evaluating if the industry with which a potential employer is operating in is under a positive or a negative impact of the pandemic. That you can, of course, easily do on your own and simply Google it, but my advice would be to go a bit deeper here and evaluate not only the industry, but the employer itself. And the thing you need to look for is adaptability. Because if the industry is down, some particular companies can thrive now, so you can have a huge temptation to work for it, but is it for long? Does the company have a plan how to adjust after the pandemic is over? And vice versa. If the industry is booming, that doesn't necessarily mean that a company is using this opportunity properly. Maybe you just cannot keep up with the growing demand. And yeah, let's take our example, right? So e-commerce and marketplaces are booming, and that's a very good sign for Vinted. But we did have some struggles at the beginning of the pandemic. We just weren't ready for such an instant and tremendous growth of parcels. So we needed to do some serious rethinking around our shipping. We solved that out successfully, but that's not the end. We know that our competitors are using this opportunity as well. So we know that we need to think ahead if we want to stay on top of the game. So that's the first thing, what you should ask during the interview. How does the pandemic affected the company's results? What changes has the company made to adjust to it? And what is the plan for the future? This will give you a good glimpse of whether or not a company is adaptable enough to survive during and post-pandemic, and in turn, whether you might end up praying not to be next in line to get fired. The other thing, and I guess the most obvious change that most of us has experienced was, of course, the remote work. And this aspect of the pandemic created the most speculation. Some said that we're never getting back to the offices. Others says that people are social creatures. So once it's all over, we all gonna want to jump back to the offices. As always, truth lies somewhere in between those the most extreme ends of the speculation. For example, Future Forum ran research with 4,700 employees, and the majority never want to go back to the old way of working. Only 12% want to return to full-time office work, and 72% want a hybrid model moving forward. Most people like being in the office for different reasons, but at the same time, they don't want it to be mandatory simply because we like to be in charge of our own time. LinkedIn also shared that since March 2020, they saw 4 times the number of jobs that offer remote work globally. They also see that trend reflecting from job seekers as well. So the volumes of job searches using the remote filter on LinkedIn has increased approximately 60% since the beginning of March 2020. So wanting to be successful, companies must adapt to this change in employees' mindset and needs to start preparing for it right away. What you need to ask your potential employers, not only how they see changes in organizing work, but also how exactly are they preparing for it? What's the policy around flexible working hours? What, how they are ensuring ergonomic workplaces at home? What about losing workplace perks and its substitutes? What kind of technologies are they using and why? And all of these things need to be addressed, because having all of these answers can tell you a lot about your employer's potential, employer's prospects to attract best talent, and you can as well choose the one who suits your individual needs the best. Again, let me give you a couple of examples from Vinted Life. So we were always quite flexible about working from home, but we understood that some people are choosing to work from the office simply because they don't have an ergonomic workplace at home. So we have desks and chairs delivered to colleagues' homes. Actually, I'm using that at the moment. We also understood that people are losing office perks such as lunch, so we arranged a food delivery option for those who prefers that. Going further, we decided on having a hybrid work model, and we are going to ask our colleagues to come to the office on Tuesday and Wednesday. That way we aim to simplify collaboration, and for the rest days people can choose where they want to work from the office, from home, from whatever. You know, there are many more initiatives that we and other companies are taking when it comes to remote work or you know, organizing work in general. So just ask what exactly those are and choose what matches your needs the most. I also want to talk about less visible things, and mostly culture and motivation. And of course, motivation is a very individual thing, but many researchers show some universal trends, what motivates people the most. Across various different studies, you can find these 5 things that pop up as the key motivators at work, and that is compensation, job security, recognition and appreciation, employee involvement, challenging work, and growth opportunities. The first one is in the nature of work relationship. The second one is one of the reasons why we are having this talk today, so I won't address these 2 separately, but the rest 3 are lying in organizations' culture and are a key why employees tend to stick around in some companies rather than others. Even if most of the companies are offering you job security and fair compensation, you somehow have to choose, right? So the study shows that most of us choose to stay or go based on these 3 later things. So the danger today is that these 3 motivators can easily be missed during the pandemic, especially when they require a bit of a different form of expression during these times. So recognition and appreciation is no longer about your manager appreciating the results you've reached, but rather recognizing what are you facing during these challenging times. Involvement is not only about being informed or being a part of a decision making, but also about staying connected to your colleagues and company on a deeper level. And growth opportunities are not only about challenging projects, but about learning what the changing future will require the most. If an employer doesn't address these needs, at the end of the day, you might feel like there's no difference for what company you do the same job. So let's dive a bit deeper into each of them. Stating the obvious, the health of almost all the people on the planet is at risk now, so the employees shouldn't think of it just as an individual problem. They have to ensure measures of physical security for people who chooses or will choose after the pandemic to work from the office, and also help those who were actually affected. So that's what you should firstly ask. What measures of security a potential employer took once the pandemic hit us, takes now, and is planning to take in the future. Another aspect is that even though most of the researchers showed productivity increase when working from home, reality shows that the work-life blend extended working hours by approximately 10 to 20%. For some people, it was extremely challenging to balance work and family responsibilities, especially for those with preschool child. And adding the factor of social isolation, we have not a very tasty cocktail contributing to the reduced mental well-being. So another set of your questions might be targeting this: what a potential employer did to, firstly, measure employee well-being, and secondly, prevent negative impact on employees' mental health. Again, let's take a look at a couple of Vinted examples. So what we did, we arranged, once the pandemic hit us, we arranged psychology lectures around the pandemic-related topics. We also provided individual sessions with psychologists for those in need. And we have given all of our employees the access to an application called Mindletic, which is focusing on improving mental well-being. So yet again, just ask, what your potential employer is doing around these topics and choose what matches your needs the most. Talking about the connection, so the pandemic might have created an impression that once it hit us, people became more connected. In the early days of the pandemic, Microsoft mined their client data from Microsoft Teams and reported a 200% increase in the virtual meetings with a total of 2.7 billion meetings per day. And that was only Microsoft Teams, but there are plenty of other platforms as well. But these are purely work meetings. And one of the most important reasons why people want to have a hybrid model of working after time gets a bit calmer is that we are neurobiologically hardwired to connect with other people on a personal level. We use this for business, we use this for our mental well-being. So we simply miss those gatherings around the coffee machine, as well as colleague coming up to our table saying, hey, do you have a minute, which turns into half an hour brainstorming session. We miss this. And that's why we need to ask our potential employer how they approach 3 different communication aspects: quantity, type, and quality. What kind of technologies and channels are used for communication across the board? How often people get business updates? What about social events? As the leaders in the company plays critical role in keeping people connected to each other and to the organization, you should address these topics with your potential manager during these interviews. How did they adapt to leading remote teams? How do they approach one-on-ones? How do they ensure the team spirit is high? You are going to meet your potential future manager at some point in the interviewing process, so use this chance to interview them as well. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. So what we did since the pandemic hit us, we started having weekly all hands with live interactions with our top management for business updates, for companies' priorities, important projects. Also, we kept promoting team building budgets so that the teams would think of something fun, even remotely, to stay connected. And we also rolled out a huge leadership training program to help our leaders during these challenging times. So again, just explore what your potential future employer does around these topics. And the last thing is learning and development, right? So upskilling and reskilling employees was an emerging trend long before the pandemic. It was getting clear that with the technological advancement, humans' focus needs to shift to so-called soft skills, right? So, but once pandemic hit us, the necessity for this unraveled with the new speed. It became absolutely clear that skills like communication, adaptivity to change, agility, change management, and so on are extremely important for organizations to thrive. And if hard skills are relatively easy to learn, as well as simply outsource, soft skills are extremely difficult to obtain. Given that in these uncertain times when we're focusing on our safety and adjusting to new reality, learning and even understanding what to learn is very difficult, companies need to give a push to their employees if they want to prosper after this madness. We at Vinted, what we did, again, for example, so we always had our learning budget as one of our perks, so we kept promoting it. But most importantly, we rolled out training program called self-development. And the aim of this program is to increase self-awareness when it comes to learning. How do you learn? What keeps you away from learning? How to learn when times are ambiguous, and these sorts of things. So that's why you have to ask your potential employer how they approach learning. What role does learning and development play within HR function? What are they focusing on in employees' development plans? What is the last thing your interviewer learned? That's also can be a good indication. This can draw you quite some picture on what growth opportunities will you have and whether your future employer is looking at the right direction. So I know I probably didn't say anything groundbreaking today, but I think we all first need to master the basics before going to the pro level. So my main message for you today is think of how organizations will potentially look like after the pandemic. Think what matters most for you personally and start interviewing your potential employer just as they interview you. And this way you will be sure to make a right decision and choose the organization which lets your talent sparkle during the pandemic and beyond. So thank you very much.